Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. In today's video, I'm doing some trash to treasure home decor makeovers. For my first project, I'm going to be working on this handmade wooden tote. It was a little bit rough and you could even still see the lead pencil lines, but I thought it was charming. I'm going to be laying down a coat of chocolate chalk mineral paint. I've still got some leftover Dixie Belle that I'm working my way through. I started brushing it on, but realized that I really wanted to create more texture, and to do this I poured some out into a plastic container, and then I'm going to add some of Dixie Belle's Sea Spray texture additive. I'm going to stir it really well together, and this is going to thicken the paint up, and it's also going to give us some lumps and bumps, and ultimately I want this to look like an old worn garden tote. So this is definitely going to help with that. And I know I go on about it, but when you want to create something that does look old and worn, you have to think about the layers and what's going on underneath your paint. So I'm going to continue to work my way around the tote, and I'm applying it in a dabbing and stippling motion. Some areas are going to have a little bit more texture than others, and if this was a little bit too much for you, obviously you could add a little bit more paint or water to thin it out, or you could go back over the top of the texture that you've created and sort of brush down the peaks so that it's a little bit more subtle. I did one coat of this mixture and then I let it dry completely. Next, I'm going to be using Fusion's milk paint in the colour Monterey, and I'm going to measure out 1 capful into a plastic container, and then I'm going to measure out an equal amount of water and stir it really well. When you're mixing your milk paint, it's a good idea to use something like a whisk, or if you want a really smooth mixture, I suggest that you use an immersion blender. Once I've got that mixed through, I'm going to apply my milk paint with a natural bristle brush. I'm going to be applying 2 coats of this paint to the entire tote. As you can see, in certain areas there's definitely more texture, certainly on the ends like here, and you can see how the milk paint is skipping over certain areas. I also did that so that when the milk paint is dry, I can come back and do some wet distressing, and that way it's going to look a little bit like chippy paint. I didn't quite get the crackle that I usually get, and I believe that's because this is a wooden tote, so it was very porous. The milk paint really sucked in. No matter how heavy I put it on and no matter how much heat I applied, I didn't really get any cracking, but I did get a lot of wonderful texture. And as I said, I can do wet distressing, and the texture that we have underneath is going to mimic the look of chippy paint. If I really wanted to get a chippy look, I could have sealed the chocolate paint first with a gloss clear coat and then put my milk paint over the top, but that's okay. You can see I'm just speeding up the drying process here. Next, I'm going to be using IOD's Lattice Rose paint inlay. I have not used this one yet, but I'm excited to try this design here. I saw Jamie Ray Vintage use it in another video and it definitely inspired me. So I'm just trimming off the amount that I'm going to need. I'm just going to be putting it on the side. Then I'm laying down a generous coat of milk paint where I want the inlay to go, and then I'm going to press it into the wet milk paint design side down. That grid should be facing up at you. I'm going to smooth it out, and once I'm happy with that, I am going to take out my mister. I'm going to mist it well, and then I will also use a wet wipe to apply some further pressure just to make sure that I have really good contact with the milk paint and the inlay. Now, I did this in a previous video and I got lots of fun chippy effects, but with this one, I think because I laid down 2 coats of the milk paint, I didn't quite get that effect, but that's okay. I still love how this ends up looking. So the inlay is completely dry. I've misted it with water, and then now I'm going to come in and start to pull it away. You can see a little bit of a peak of the chocolate coming up through underneath, but mainly it is quite a solid finish. But there is some imperfections in the paint inlay design itself, which looks like chippy paint. Now, at this point, I wanted to try and use the inlay again, But guys, I will warn you, this does actually end up as a bit of a fail. I think I put down too much paint here and I didn't let my inlay dry, which already had quite a buildup of that milk paint on it, and it was very wet. So once I've put it in there, I feel like it was too much paint blocking the leftover inlay design on there. So it's definitely a lesson learned for me. I am not going to have issues reusing the rose chintz inlay that I did in my previous video, but unfortunately with this one, you will see we did not really get much of anything happening. So if you're going to do this, I suggest letting that inlay dry, and definitely don't use as much milk paint as I did, because I think that was definitely an issue here. So lesson learned, and hopefully you can learn from my mishap here. Next, I'm going to take a wet wipe and I'm going to go around and do some wet distressing on the edges of our tote here. That's going to pull it back to see the chocolate underneath. I'm also going to do that over the top of some of the texture that we created with that chocolate sea spray mixture. If you're going to do this, it will be to your liking how much you pull back. You can definitely be quite dramatic with this look. That's the beauty of milk paint and being able to reactivate it with water. Once I had done that, however, I took a stencil that I had in my stash and I want to put the words fleurs, obviously that means flowers, and I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Cozy Beige Chalk Paint. I'm dabbing off the excess paint first, and then you can see I am doing a dabbing motion over the top of the stencil. I don't need this to be perfect. I want this to look vintage, so I don't mind if I do have a little bit of bleeding underneath, but I really do love the look of the chalk paint over the top of the milk paint. It just is a really lovely finish, and this Cozy Beige is actually a pretty close color match to the creamy tone that's in that lattice rose paint inlay. Once I'd finished with that particular stencil, I then took out another one, and I just want to use the little swirls that are in the corners there. I'm going to be putting that on the left and right hand side of the fleurs design that we've already done. I ended up going a little bit into another section of the stencil accidentally, but in the end I actually liked how it looked. And it does inspire me to actually go around and do a little bit of dry brushing with this same Cozy Beige, almost to make it look like at one point this was painted white. So some of that white is peeking through underneath our milk paint. So you can see I'm just going along the edges with the same brush that I stenciled with, just running it over the edges, just giving a peek of that lovely creamy tone here and there. When the paint was dry, I took out some spray wax and I'm just going to spray that over the top of the inlay. I usually like to use a spray sealer like Rust-Oleum Clear Matte Sealer to seal, but I thought I would see how it went, seeing as it's in the milk paint, and it actually held up pretty well. Right here I'm just spreading out that spray wax and also adding a little bit more of my clear wax over the top of the inlay with a microfiber cloth. I'm using quite a soft hand, I'm not pressing too hard just in case I reactivate the inlay, as this is a water-based wax. So I'm just going to continue doing this. I do love sealing milk paint with wax. It definitely gives a lovely vintage look to it, and I'm just going to continue to work my way around the tote, sealing the entire piece with that clear wax. And here's a look at our finished wooden tote. I really love how this turned out. I think that the milk paint pairs so beautifully with the lattice rose transfer, and I think the stencil really finished it off. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my second project, I'm going to be giving this frame a makeover. I really loved the shape of it, so I thought that I would be able to give it a bit of an upgrade with some molds. It had a little bit of a shiny finish, so I'm just going to take some 220 grit sandpaper and run that over the top and do a bit of a scuff sand to start off with. This is going to help my paint stick. After removing the sanding dust, I took out Redesign's Madame Garland mold. Unfortunately, this is a retired design, but I was lucky enough to find one for myself. I'm dusting the design that I want to use with cornstarch first, and then I'm working some DAS air dry clay into the design, just pushing that excess clay out. If you want a really flat back and clean edge on your molds here, you could use a plastic card to run over the top. I'm then going to flex the mold, then bend it over, and gravity helps me get it out. I'm going to be positioning this design in the top right hand corner, and then once I'm happy with how that looks, I am going to be casting the other design, but just the little bow and pendant piece, so that we can sort of finish it off so that we have the roses draping across the top. So you can see I'm just doing a partial casting here of that opposite bow. Once I have that casting out, I'll position it on the left-hand side. I had to pull some of the excess clay off, and I did have a little bit of breakage down the bottom, but remember, this really does not matter if it happens. You can just glue them back together. Next, I'm going to cast the design up the top there, but I don't want that bow section that's attached, so I am just going to be doing a partial casting there, working the clay in and then pushing it out. I'm going to be positioning this casting up the top in the center, but I realized I would need to cut a little bit of those roses off just so that it sat a little bit flatter. I'm then going to be casting what I think might be laurels. They're just very, very thin and delicate. I'm going to be casting both of those with air dry clay, and those are going to be going on the left and right hand side of the frame. One thing that I really do like about a lot of the Redesign molds is the scale. This is quite a thin and delicate frame, and the scale of these is just perfect for this project. I'm then going to be casting some of the roses, and I'm going to position that in the bottom section in the center. I'm then going to be doing some partial castings and positioning that on the right hand side. Once I have all of my castings organized, I'm going to use my Sealy's Quickset wood glue to glue everything down. The top sections were so delicate that I felt like it was just easier for me to add the glue to the frame surface itself, and then I can go back in and I can clean up that glue with a wet wipe. For some of the others, however, I was able to add the glue directly to the back of the castings. I let my castings dry for several hours, and then I came in with a black chalk paint. I'm going to be gentle here because these are not completely dry, but I was impatient to get this project done. So I am being very gentle, and doing the dabbing motion is helping me get into all of those crevices and really get down into all of those details. I'm just going to be doing one coat of this black. This is something that I like to do when I'm going to be going over the top of a frame with metallics. I find that this just really helps as a base, and also if I have some of the paint peeking through, it will just look like some weather and wear and tear on the frame that's happened over time. When my paint was completely dry, I then took out Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic. This is definitely one of my favorites. If you've been watching me for a while, you'll know that. I'm just going to go over the top of my castings with that beautiful bronze. And as you can see, the coverage is really amazing. And this does definitely get a lot more vibrant as it dries. I'm only going to be doing one coat on this, but I did then go back in and do a bit of a touch up in certain areas where maybe I'd missed a spot or I'd gone a little bit lighter. I went with bronze for this project because I am going for an old world sort of French feel, but this is definitely the kind of project that you can customize and put your own spin on. You could come in with Paint Couture's antique gold, you could go in a copper direction or maybe a silver. There's a lot of options for this particular craft. Now it's time to focus on creating some artwork for the center. I'm taking out one of my favorite IOD transfers, the ephemeral melange transfer, and I'm thinking that I want to have some florals, so I'm going to cut out one of the designs on this 4-page sheet. If you don't have transfers to work with, a decoupage paper design or some sort of printed design would definitely work as well. I'm just going to trace out the shape of my frame on some drop cloth that I'm going to use. This is definitely one of my favorite things to do as well, and I'm just going to cut that to size. I did give this a little bit of an iron as well before the next step. I'm going to peel the backing off the transfer and then lay it in the center and then press down. I'm going to be using my transfer tool to go over the top of the entire design first, just to make sure it's stuck down. You can see I always have one hand holding it in place, and this is especially important when you're using fabric because it can bend up and wrinkle, and that can make it tricky to get your design down properly. So I'm just going to work my way around that transfer, really making sure that I have all of that little text down and transferred well. Next, it's time to put the artwork back in the frame. And here's a look at our finished project. I'm really happy with how this turned out. That plain frame has been completely transformed with redesigned molds and some artwork from IOD. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. My final project is quite an easy one. We're going to be giving this little bunny a makeover. It was very sweet, but it had quite a lot of marks on it that I couldn't get off with cleaning. I'm just going to go in with that same black chalk paint, and I'm dabbing and stippling that on just to create a little bit of texture. I ended up doing 2 even coats. My goal for this little bunny project is to give it a look of weathered cast iron. If you have gotten this far into my video, I want to say an extra special thank you for putting up with my croaky voice. I think it's definitely the season for that, so I appreciate you sticking with me throughout this video. Once my paint was completely dry, I took out Fusion's liming wax. I started applying it with a brush and then decided that I would be able to get into those details a little bit better with a microfiber cloth. So I've just put some of that wax onto the cloth itself, and now I'm really working it into the details on this sweet little bunny. And then once I have a certain section covered in the amount that I want, I just go back in and pull some of that back, and this is definitely helping to achieve that weathered and worn, almost oxidized cast iron look. Liming wax is very similar to white wax, so if you have that, you could use that for this look. You could also do a white paint wash with some watered down chalk paint as well. And here's a look at our finished bunny statue. This was a very easy flip, but I think very effective. Our little bunny definitely looks a bit more like vintage cast iron now. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. I really hope that you've enjoyed today's projects. Let me know if you had a favorite from today in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find most of the products used today on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Thanks for watching.